The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the man from Lang. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, I am continuing with my reviews of the player cards in Threads of Fate, the first Mythos pack in the Forgotten Age cycle. In this episode, we are looking at the Rogue cards. There are spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Rogues got the short end of the stick, in my opinion, in the Forgotten Age Deluxe expansion, so let's see if they can do any better in Threads of Fate. The first Rogue card in the pack is Lucky Cigarette Case. It's a 2-cost asset with a willpower skill icon. With the item and charm traits, it has the game text response after you succeed at a skill test by 2 or more. Exhaust Lucky Cigarette Case. Draw 1 card. Lucky Cigarette Case does take up the accessory slot. It's been almost exactly a year since I released 3 videos about rogues and the Succeed by 2 archetype. So now is as good a time as any to examine how that archetype has evolved. The Succeed by 2 mechanic has received several new tools since I made those videos, including lockpicks and daring maneuver in the Path to Carcosa, cheap shot and level 2 pickpocketing in A Phantom of Truth, and watch this in the Pallid Mask. Lucky Cigarette Case addresses one of the key issues with the Succeed by 2 archetype, that being the number of cards and or resources you need to commit to skill tests to consistently succeed by 2. Rogues aren't exactly known for having amazing stats, which can make it difficult for an investigator to succeed by 2 if he or she is fighting an enemy with a 41 Derringer or a Switchblade. A rogue can improve his or her odds of succeeding by 2 by committing resources and our cards to the skill test. However, those cards and resources can quickly add up, especially toward the end of a campaign when the Chaos Bag is much more malicious. Lucky Cigarette Case gives the investigator a card every time he or she succeeds by 2, alleviating some of the pressure the mechanic puts on his or her hand. The more cards you can draw, the more options you will have at your disposal, and Lucky Cigarette Case can help replace at least some of the cards that you are committing to skill tests in order to succeed by 2. Now, if you're unwilling to go all in on the Succeed by 2 mechanic, I think Lucky Cigarette Case is still worth a look, because drawing extra cards is almost always a good thing in this game. Rogues don't have much in the way of card draw besides pickpocketing and Decorated Skull, and even then Decorated Skull doesn't really count since you're simply taking an action to draw a card, which you can do through the game mechanics anyway. Both of those cards are also tailored toward specific deck archetypes, those being Evasion and Combat respectively. Lucky Cigarette Case doesn't care which skill test you pass as long as you succeed by 2, so you could end up triggering it during the Mythos phase or the Investigation phase. One of the easiest ways to trigger Lucky Cigarette Case is to play it in combination with lockpicks from the Path to Carcosa. Succeeding by 2 with lockpicks really is a breeze at all but the highest shroud locations for investigators such as Skids O'Toole or Wendy Adams, both of whom have a skill value of 7. Investigation is the name of the game in the Arkham Horror LCG, so discovering a clue and netting a card turn after turn with this combination is quite good. Lucky Cigarette Case does cost 2 resources, but the faster you can dig through your deck, the faster you're going to find your cards like Emergency Cash or Watch This in order to recoup those resources. And then there's Finn Edwards, who has a combined skill value of 8 with lockpicks. Finn could play lockpicks, pickpocketing, and Lucky Cigarette Case to draw cards when he discovers clues or evades enemies, which is pretty awesome if you want all that card draw. Other players such as Myriad over at ArkhamDB have suggested splashing Lucky Cigarette Case in Rex Murphy. If Rex succeeds by 2 during an investigate action, he could grab 2 clues and a card, which is pretty fantastic. It's worth noting that Lucky Cigarette Case is non-unique, so if you want to be really aggressive, you could play 2 of them as long as you're willing to invest in Relic Hunter from the Essex County Express. You might be better off playing 1 copy of Lucky Cigarette Case and 1 copy of Pickpocketing, though, so you don't have to pay the 3 experience points for that relic hunter. To be perfectly honest, I haven't played with a succeed by 2 mechanic much of late, but if I did, if I did build a deck around it, Lucky Cigarette Case would certainly make the cut without hesitation. Drawing cards is extremely important in the Arkham Horror LCG, and it's even more so in the Succeed by 2 archetype. If you want to consistently succeed by 2, you will need to commit cards and or resources to skill tests, so replenishing your hand after you commit those cards is vital, which makes Lucky Cigarette Case such a welcome addition to the Rogue card pool. The second Rogue card in the pack is Fence. It's a 3-cost asset that costs 1 experience point. It has a single agility skill icon and the connection and illicit traits. It has the game text response. When you play an illicit card during your turn, exhaust Fence. The illicit card gains fast. If it was already fast, reduce its cost by 1 instead. The illicit trait has been receiving some love in recent releases. Finn Edwards' signature event, Smuggle Goods, lets Finn search either your discard pile or the top 9 cards of your deck for an illicit card as long as there are no ready enemies at your location, while Fence lets you play an illicit card as though it was fast or reduce its cost by 1 if it was already fast. There are 16 cards with the illicit trait, and most of them are assets. In addition to Fence, there are both versions of the 41 Derringer, Burglary, Chicago Typewriter, Finn's Trusty 38, Knuckle Duster, Liquid Courage, Lockpicks, Lupara, and both versions of Pickpocketing and Switchblade. There are also 2 events, Contraband and the aforementioned Smuggled Goods. Only 3 of the cards are fast, so you can play Finn's Trusty 38 or the level 2 Pickpocketing for 1 resource each, while both versions of Switchblade are free. Based on the list of illicit cards currently available in the game, most of the time you're going to be triggering Fence to generate action advantage. It will cost you an action to play Fence, so you need to trigger it at least twice before you come out ahead. That raises a couple of important questions. The first one being, you've got to ask yourself, how many extra actions do you need to take before Fence is worth playing? Personally, I'm not sure taking a couple extra actions is worthwhile. I'd be looking at taking 2 or 3 extra actions at least to make it valuable. Now, dropping cards such as Burglary or Liquid Courage into play without wasting an action is really quite good, just because both of those cards will cost you an action to play and an action to activate. This way you can just get busy activating them on your turn. Dropping a firearm into play without spending an action is also great, especially if you're engaged with an enemy. However, you can achieve the same goal with Sleight of Hand, the rogue event from the Path to Carcosa. I like Sleight of Hand more than Fence because it is cheaper and you don't need to take an action to put it into play in the first place. The second question is related to the first, and that is how many illicit cards should you include in your deck in order to hit that target number you set of actions you want to save? That's a more difficult question to answer. Fence costs only 1 experience point, but some of the best illicit cards also cost experience points. Fence seems like the type of card that you pick up mid to late campaign once you've got enough good illicit cards in your deck to support it. One problem with a card like Fence is that you really want to see it as early as possible during a scenario, so you can leverage it as long as possible. That leaves you with a couple of options. Your first is to purchase 2 copies of Fence and mulligan hard for it when you draw your opening hand. I'm not that crazy about playing 2 copies of Fence, since the second copy isn't going to be all that useful, and it's got only a single agility skill icon if you want to commit it to a skill test. Now, theoretically, you could play 2 copies of Fence and trigger both when you play an asset or event with the illicit trait, Let's say you want to play a Chicago typewriter, for example. When you trigger the first copy of Fence, the Chicago typewriter becomes fast. Then you trigger the second copy to reduce the Chicago typewriter's cost by 1. The problem with this plan, of course, is that you've got to spend 6 resources to get both copies of Fence into play, and I think you're going to be hard pressed to play enough illicit cards in your deck during a scenario to recoup some of those resources you paid out front. It's worth noting that if you mulligan hard for Fence, it's probably going to conflict with another popular first turn play for rogues, that being, of course, Leo DeLuca. Given the choice between the two cards, I'm playing Leo first, and Fence will have to wait, and it may end up waiting quite a while since it does cost 3 resources, which is pretty steep, especially after you have paid 5 or 6 resources to get Leo into play. The Leo wins out here, though, because, I mean, you're getting his extra action turn after turn, and it doesn't matter whether you're playing illicit cards or not. Your second option is to find some way to tutor for Fence. Finn has the advantage over other rogues in this regard since he can tutor for Fence using smuggled goods. However, a single copy of smuggled goods isn't going to be a very reliable tutor. Fortunately, Finn can also dip into the Seeker card pool for tutors such as Eureka, No Stone Unturned, and Old Book of Lore. After Finn, Jenny Barnes is probably your second best choice since she can use up to 5 level 0 cards from any class, which means the Seeker tutors are fair game for her as well. I'm not wild about Fence at the moment. The resources feel like a lot to spend on an asset that doesn't really have a large impact on the board state, even for a wealthy rogue. Certainly comparing it to Leo DeLuca, I'd much rather have Leo out first. Fence can generate action advantage, true, but that action advantage depends a lot on seeing other cards in your deck at the right time. That said, I think Fence is one of those cards that will likely improve with age. There aren't that many illicit cards with the illicit trait at the moment, and it seems unlikely that you're going to play them all in the same deck. Once there are more cards with the illicit trait that really get played in the same deck, it will become easier to leverage Fence to generate action and or resource advantage in mid to late campaign. Like I mentioned, I don't think you want to be picking this one up until you've got some of those better illicit assets in your deck, like the Chicago typewriter. That's going to do it for my review of the rogue cards in Threads of Fate. I wasn't all that impressed by the rogue cards in Forgotten Age, and the cards in Threads of Fate they're only so-so. I do like Lucky Cigarette Case because it does give the Succeed by 2 mechanic a nice shot in the arm, and I think it's good enough to make the cut in other decks as well. Contrary to what you may have heard elsewhere, drawing extra cards is amazing in this game, which means a card like Lucky Cigarette Case is always going to be worth a look. If you're playing lockpicks, and let's be honest, if you're playing a rogue, you probably should be, Lucky Cigarette Case will net you an extra card a turn at all but the highest shroud locations, which is quite good. Fence, on the other hand, feels very much like a mid to late campaign card, something you include in your deck once you've picked up some of the other good illicit cards that cost experience points. If you're playing a lot of cards with the illicit keyword, you'll want to play Fence as early as possible. However, if you are playing a rogue, you'll likely want to get Leo DeLuca in play as early as possible as well, and there are only so many resources to go around at the start of a game. I think Fence is going to become a lot more attractive as we see more cards with the illicit keyword. Who knows, maybe we'll even see some of them later in this cycle. I'm not sure how many illicit cards that you need to include in your deck to make Fence worthwhile, but I don't think we're quite there yet. That's going to do it for my review. If you enjoyed what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromling@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromling. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.